In 1873, a German zoologist named Carl Mobius placed a northern pike into a glass tank. He dropped in a handful of live minnows. The pike did what pike do. It devoured them, effortlessly. Then Mobius did something cruel. He lowered a clear, invisible pane of glass into the center of the tank, separating the pike from its food. The pike charged, full force, again and again and again. It hit the glass so hard that it would sometimes float upside down, completely dazed. After hundreds of attempts, it stopped. It sank to the bottom of the tank, and it gave up. Mobius removed the glass. The minnows swam freely, right in front of its face. Some even brushed against its mouth. The pike didn't move. It starved to death, surrounded by an abundance of food, paralyzed by a barrier that no longer existed. Now, replace the tank with your desk. Replace the minnows with the task you know you need to start. And replace the glass wall with that invisible, heavy something that sits between you and the first line of work every single morning. You sit down with full intention. You have the time, you have the skill, but somewhere between opening the laptop and starting the first task, you freeze. 40 minutes evaporate, and the only thought left is, what is wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. You haven't been conditioned by a glass tank, but the evidence suggests that your nervous system has been trained by something remarkably similar. And once you understand the mechanism, the paralysis starts to make perfect, predictable sense. To understand what's actually happening, we need to talk about dopamine, but not in the way you've probably heard it. Dopamine is not a pleasure chemical, it's a motivation chemical. It's the signal your brain sends to say, that thing over there, it's worth the effort. Go get it. Now, digital platforms deliver something your brain was never designed for: fast-paced, high-arousal, instant reward with zero effort required. Every scroll, every notification, every new video fires that dopamine signal over and over and over. And because your brain is being overstimulated, it does the only rational thing it can. It turns down its own volume. It downregulates dopamine production to try to bring itself back to normal. As researcher and psychiatrist Dr. Anna Lembke explains, because we are overstimulating it, our brain starts to downregulate our own dopamine production, and that dopamine deficit can result in feelings like low motivation, low energy. So now your brain looks at your to-do list, a task that requires sustained effort for a delayed reward, and the go signal simply doesn't fire. It's not laziness, it's a depleted system unable to generate the neurochemical drive required to begin. There's a second layer to this. Your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, is your command center. It handles planning, decision-making, and, critically, impulse control. But constant digital multitasking, context switching, and sensory overload put this region under enormous strain. Research shows that workers face an average of 87 interruptions per day, and that this reduces their capacity for deep work by 40%. When executive function is impaired, the brain has a fallback. It defaults to automatic processing, habitual, unconscious behavior. Instead of rationally choosing to start work, your brain takes the path of least resistance. And in a digital environment, that path is almost always the scroll. On average, Americans check their phones roughly 80 times a day. That's once every 12 minutes. Not because they choose to, but because the behavioral loop has become automatic. But here's the part that changes everything. The part the neuroscience community rediscovered 50 years after the Pike experiment. Researchers Maier and Seligman found that passivity, that frozen feeling when you can't seem to act even though you want to, is not something you learn. It's the brain's default, unlearned response to prolonged stress. Passivity in response to shock is not learned. It is the default, unlearned response to prolonged aversive events. When the brain is under sustained, uncontrollable stress, the dorsal raphe nucleus releases serotonin, and that serotonin actively inhibits the escape response. You don't freeze because you're weak, you freeze because your brainstem is designed to freeze when it believes the situation is uncontrollable. The only thing that breaks this cycle is a signal from the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a top-down override that says, "Wait, I have control here." When the brain detects that you can influence the outcome, it actively inhibits the freeze response. But if the brain has been trained through repeated digital overstimulation, through constant failure to resist the scroll, through daily experience of trying and failing to start, that control signal stops firing. And what you're left with is a pike, surrounded by everything it needs, paralyzed by a wall that no longer exists. So, if the core problem is that your brain has lost its sense of control, the solution isn't willpower, it isn't motivation, it isn't discipline, it's restoring the signal. The neuroscience points to a clear framework. To refire the VMPFC override, you need to give the brain evidence of control, small, undeniable proof that your actions lead to outcomes. Here are 3 micro-interventions designed to do exactly that. Intervention 1, the 2-minute Launchpad. Remember, the freeze happens because your brain's go signal can't fire for big, effort-heavy tasks. So don't start the task. Start an action so absurdly small that it requires almost zero dopamine to initiate. Open the document, write 1 sentence, set a timer for 2 minutes. That is the only commitment. What this does neurologically is critical. It gives the VMPFC evidence of agency. You chose to act. The outcome matched the intention. The override signal gets a little bit stronger. You're not building momentum, you are neurologically rebuilding the control signal. Intervention 2, the friction architect. Digital platforms are engineered to remove every possible barrier between you and the scroll. No stopping cues, no endpoint, unpredictable rewards. Your job is to reverse engineer friction back into the loop. Move your phone to another room during work blocks. Enable app timers or grayscale mode. Close every browser tab before you begin. Remove social apps from your home screen. Each step adds friction to the automatic path and makes the intentional path slightly easier by comparison. You are not relying on willpower, you are redesigning the environment so that your brain's path of least resistance leads somewhere useful. Intervention 3, the Doomscroll circuit breaker. Research shows that individuals who consume more than 2 hours of crisis media daily score 23% lower on working memory tasks, and those cognitive deficits linger for up to 48 hours. Your brain is wired to pay attention to threats. That's an evolutionary survival feature. But the infinite feed of modern crisis media keeps that threat detection system permanently activated, draining your limited cognitive resources until there's nothing left for actual work. The circuit breaker is simple. Choose 2 fixed windows, say 8 a.m. and 7 p.m., where you allow yourself to check the news. Between those windows, the feed is off, not through willpower, through environment. Delete the app, use a website blocker, or set your phone to do not disturb outside those windows. What you're doing is giving your prefrontal cortex time to recover, time where it's not being bombarded by novel threats and can actually do its job, planning, deciding, and overriding the freeze response. The pike in Mobius's tank couldn't remove the glass. It had no way to understand what was happening to it. You can. The glass wall is not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's a biological response to a system designed to overwhelm you. And now that you can see it, you can start to dismantle it. 1 sentence, 1 signal. That's where it starts. I put together a written breakdown of this exact framework with a printable version you can pin to your workspace. It's in the newsletter, link below.